July 5th, 2020. COVID had hit, and so I wasn't playing any gigs. And I went golfing with my wife and our niece and nephew on the 5th of July. But I hadn't been playing because there was no work in my case. We had played golf, and then I felt something was different when I was driving home. Ended up at the hospital and got diagnosed preliminarily with stroke. Some people that I know, a chiropractor in particular, who happens to be a radiologist by training as well, said that no, you didn't have a stroke. You have this Bell's palsy, and you will get better, but it's going to take a while. In a really, it's almost a perverse way to think about it. I think Bell's palsy was the best thing that ever happened to my trumpet playing, because for all the bad habits that I had, all the bad playing habits that I never had anyone fix, and kind of doing things on my own, the training with Bobby Shew prepared me to play sort of more correctly and certainly more efficiently after things started to strengthen again and come back. I don't typically look through rose-colored glasses. However, in this case, I don't think I'd have it any other way. I hate to say it, but I'm almost glad it happened because it made me a better player. I had to just sacrifice some time, but it was during COVID, so I didn't miss any gigs, So, and again, I'm extremely fortunate of the timing. But no, I mean, if that's what it took to get me to play better and easier and more efficiently, then so be it. So be it. I'm good with it. I don't want to have any regrets as far as that goes.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Trust the Process. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today. He is a trumpet player based out of Rochester, New York, and also he's an audiologist. And so this is our first guest who has what we call a day job in the music business, but he is also a very active performer in the upstate New York area. And he is somebody that our first guest, Bobby Shew, pointed me to when looking for people that have experienced injury and have come back from it. And so I'm really excited for you guys to hear Ron's story with injury recovery. And so without further ado, Ron D'Angelo, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Clark. Pleasure to be here. And it was nice talking to you to get to know each other a little bit before we started the recording. So again, I will start pretty much wherever you think I should, even because I've given you some of my backstory, and I don't know how much of that you might feel is relevant, or we can go right into the Bell's palsy thing.
I was really actually enjoying this stuff. There's so much that's applicable, to everybody that's listening, with the educators that listen to the show, to the musicians going through injury. And so if you actually want to just kind of go back to that time we were talking about off camera of how you got started on the trumpet, but how that kind of influenced, that you had mentioned that you had issues in the a couple of years ago due to equipment, but then also going into your experience with Bell's palsy.
Sure. So I had started the trumpet in 6th grade. I started a year after all my friends because typically the band program in the towns like where you and I grew up usually started in 5th grade. And I started in 6th grade, and I happened to have braces at the time. But I think I just didn't want to wait any longer. I'm not sure why, I waited until 6th grade, but I did. That's just the way it was. So I probably had some weird amateur stuff going on from the very beginning because I had this wire under my upper lip and not on my lower lip, but on the upper lip. And I had to just do whatever happened, whatever I had to make the sound come out. And one of my messages to any of the teachers out there, especially ones that deal with younger kids or beginners, is that I have this kind of concept that I've been thinking about for years now, and that is sometimes talent can delay development. And what I mean is,
and what do you mean by that? Yeah.
So what I mean is, if everyone starts, if you assume that all kids start at the same place, they have the same level of ability, their same level of effort, and you give them their exercises that they think they should do, that's fine, but it might not be that realistic. When I first started, I had already had taken piano lessons, so I knew how to read music, and I had a good ear. I had a good like relative pitch. I was able to pick things out by ear and play them without regard to what note I was playing. I just kind of could figure out the relationships between the notes and the vowels and the air that I
Mm-hmm.
was putting into the horn. And so by the time I was in eighth grade, they made me first chair in the middle school band, and I kind of felt like I'm honored by that, but I didn't think I was ready. I thought these other kids, but I was going through the stuff so fast that he just threw more music at me, and I wasn't, unfortunately, developing my chops the way I was, the way I should rather, because I wasn't practicing the way you're kind of supposed to practice. I basically would sight read my lesson and get through it with a crappy sound and crappy articulation, and then when I got home, I'd put on records, Chuck Mangione or Tijuana Brass, Maynard Ferguson, whatever, and I was trying to imitate those guys. So I kind of developed my musicianship faster than I developed my chops, and I think it probably trapped me into incorrect ways of playing. I had a sort of a double embouchure. I was one of those kids. I had a low note setup, which is really pretty lame. Actually, I could barely reach the top of the staff with that, and then I would kind of reload, move the horn up, move the mouthpiece down, and I zing these high notes. And it took me years to figure out how to kind of get away from that. And it really had more to do with exploiting my high note setup, for lack of a better term, uh, to be able to come down with that and play the whole range of the horn. And after high school, I really didn't have a lot of teachers, so I had to kind of figure things out on my own. That's another parallel with Bobby Shew, because he was completely self-taught.
Right. Right.
And I think I had that other story about how I would play scales by ear in my lessons. He would say play an E flat major scale, and I would just natural minor, harmonic minor. I knew what it sounded like, and I could just play them by ear. And then one day he said to me, "Play a major scale in three flats," and I just stared at the ground, and I couldn't do it uh, because I was using my ear. And that's when he wised up and said, "You can't do that, huh? You haven't." So I haven't. That's the sense that I had these abilities, and it delayed me from learning other things. So there's no major soapbox there, but it's just something I think for other teachers, not other teachers, teachers, because I'm not a teacher, to be aware of. Is that are there kids that are kind of skating by on natural ability, that aren't putting the time in to really develop things the correct way, and to develop their strength and their
Setup.
breathing and
Yeah.
their chops. Um,
I think that's so
I
important because
yeah.
just real quick, because I was telling you off camera, that's kind of how I was in middle school. And when I first started, I actually started in sixth grade, just like you.
Yeah.
And I had that, I wouldn't say I had a lot of natural ability, but I did have a lot of music in the home. And so I was eagerly and earnestly just like learning as much music as I could. Actually, it was funny you mentioned off camera, the Tijuana Brass, because the first thing I transcribed was Spanish Flea by Herb
Yep.
Alpert. And,
Yep.
but yeah, but that forced me to, without the proper guidance, to manipulate my setup in a way that I could get the sound, but not in the most healthy way, which then, 10 years later, 12 years later for me led to an injury. And so that whole talent thing, I think, is so
Yeah.
important for everyone to, to really let that sink in.
Yep. And I think ultimately through the 1990s, after I was done with college and I was, playing gigs with all, different kinds of bands up here in upstate New York, my playing went gradually downhill with this particular set of equipment that I was using, where all I could do was play everything loud on a big mouthpiece, and which is not where I wanted to be. I didn't want to be at that level of effort. I knew it wasn't very efficient, but I didn't know how not to do that. And I had some good lessons, one-off lessons with people like John Faddis and Jim Hines out of New York City, and they gave me some very good things to work on. But the biggest improvement came, believe it or not, when I switched horns and I got a different horn. And I know as brass players and trumpet players in particular, we're always kind of taught that, it's if you're not playing the horn correctly, it's your fault. If it's not sounding good, you're not
Right.
making it happen, and you need to control what it is you're doing. It's never the equipment, but in this case, it really was. As soon as I started playing this, it was actually a large bore Besson Miha. I could go back to my old mouthpiece. It wasn't it wasn't where I was right away. It took years to kind of get back, but that was actually the biggest factor. So sometimes, you're never going to find the ultimate, holy grail of instruments, but it is sometimes
Right.
worth the search, And then as
From a
things
health
got better,
standpoint, right?
oh yeah, definitely, and
Yeah, from a health standpoint, it's so
and
important.
luckily, like I might have mentioned, off camera, because I do something else for a living, and I'm working 40 plus hours a week doing that. I'm also quite fortunate that my wife happens to be a music teacher, and she appreciates what it is that I do. Our talents are completely different in music, and she's a great teacher, but she also appreciates why I have to come down here in the lower level of the house every day and do what it is that I do and go out and play gigs and that kind of stuff. She gets it, so I'm very, very fortunate in that regard. So I think that's important too, is that you need to be able to have the freedom to do what it takes to maintain what you have, or to develop and get better. Um, but things you can't ever prepare for would be something like July 5th, 2020. COVID had hit, and so I wasn't playing any gigs, not live ones anyway. We were doing some of those band recordings where you record yourself playing your part, and then someone mixes it together. I was doing that for a band called Primetime Funk, which is a really great Tower of Power style band based here in Rochester. And I went golfing with my wife and our niece and nephew on the 5th of July. And I know Bobby says a lot of times trumpet players set up the situation that can cause Bell's palsy, which is what I had, which is what I got, by playing hard and kind of affecting the middle ear and that thing. But I hadn't been playing because there was no work in my case. We had played golf, and then I felt something was different when I was driving home. Ended up at the hospital and got diagnosed preliminarily with a stroke, which didn't feel very good to hear that.
That's scary.
It was
Scary,
absolutely
man.
terrifying, and you don't feel like a victim. You feel like, what did I do to cause this? Absolutely, I guarantee you that's what you're going to feel like if anyone ever tries to tell you that. Meanwhile, some people that I know, a chiropractor in particular, who happens to be a radiologist by training as well, said that no, you didn't have a stroke. You have this Bell's palsy, and you will get better, but it's going to take a while. And meanwhile, some ENT friends of mine, ear, nose, and throat surgeons, agreed with that and prescribed me medication, namely steroids, a course of steroids, and maybe an antiviral, because the usual assumption is that it's a viral etiology, which is kind of hard to tell because I certainly was not tested for that kind of thing. But my I had a CT scan which showed something that they weren't comfortable with on in my brain, but my what's the other word I'm looking for? MRI turned out to be totally clean. So obviously they ruled out the stroke, and that was good to know.
Right.
But two things that I would like to think helped me was the course of steroids, which I started as fast as I could, and this chiropractic maneuver that Bobby Shew actually talks about. It's called Grostic, and there's only one guy in the state of New York apparently that's licensed to do this kind of stuff, and it's the guy that I know that I went to. So he did these maneuvers over the next month or so. Yeah. And again, if you ask me, did it help? I really can't honestly say that because it's kind of a silly question because there's only one of me. I don't have a control group. I don't have a twin to not have those, I don't, to not have had those therapies to see what the outcome will be for that person. All I know is it didn't hurt, certainly didn't hurt. And I know it was certainly based in some sort of science and experience. So I put something on Facebook about this, and immediately I got this flood of advice coming in, unsolicited advice, which I still appreciate because the guys were just trying to help. All these guys that I know all over the place. And as you know, trumpet players are sort of like an unofficial fraternity. I've got all these Facebook friends that I've never met and probably will never meet. But we got each other's backs. You know how that is. And it's cool, but I got two private messages. One from an old friend of mine from Berkeley named Bill Dowling, another from an old friend of mine who actually went to my high school, named of Marty Bound, who's in New York City. And they both said almost word for word the same thing. Get with Bobby Shew. Do not mess around. Go right to Bobby. And they hooked me up with Bobby, got me the contact information. And and that started my true, chop rehabilitation. And again, I'm not going to totally give away everything that Bobby told me to do in any kind of detail. I'm not here to give any kind of chop advice or anything like that. But um, one thing you have to know, for this particular kind of injury, it's, Bell's palsy is a seventh cranial nerve palsy. That's the facial nerve. And the facial nerve comes out and it serves the one half of your face.
Up here, right?
So to this day, sometimes when I play trumpet, if I'm playing hard, my left eye will close, which is kind of irritating, but it's not debilitating. So I guess that's one symptom of the condition that has persisted for me. Although I think my chops, generally speaking, are back, and in a really, it's almost a perverse way to think about it. I think Bell's palsy was the best thing that ever happened to my trumpet playing, because for all the bad habits that I had, all the bad playing habits that I never had anyone to fix, and kind of doing things on my own, the training with Bobby Shew prepared me to play sort of more correctly and certainly more efficiently after things started to strengthen again and come back. One of the reasons, even self-taught players, it's good to have someone to check out what you're doing, or a teacher or a coach or whatever, is something I learned in a golf lesson many years ago. And it was the concept of feel versus real. That what you think you're doing when you're swinging a golf club or maybe playing trumpet is not necessarily what you really are doing. So it's good to have an outside person who has at least as much experience, if not more, as you, to observe what it is that you're doing, to make sure you're on the right path, and it takes an awful lot of patience to come back from these kind of injuries, because the seventh nerve, it gets inflamed for whatever reason, and it's not pumping the signal through. Interestingly, I think there is something to it. As an audiologist, I do a test in the office on virtually every patient called Acoustic Reflex, where there's a little middle ear reflex that is designed to protect us against loud sounds by pulling on the eardrum and not letting as much sound through. And interestingly, the two nerves that are involved are the auditory nerve, which carries the signal inward towards your brain, towards the brain stem, and the facial nerve, the very nerve I'm talking about, which goes back, carries the signal back to your eardrum and pulls on a little tiny muscle called the stapedius, which helps protect you against loud sounds. And one of the ways you can stimulate it, besides being exposed to a loud sound, is to actually sing or talk or blow a horn. Interestingly, so you are technically stimulating that facial nerve when you're playing. And so I believe Bobby has a point, is that sometimes some hard, vigorous playing can possibly have an effect. But in my case, if you heard the interview with Bobby, and obviously you heard it, but the people out there that are listening, he said he talked about most of them had encounters with cold air, and he said sleeping next to an air conditioner, and that was me. He was talking about is that I slept at my in-laws' house for 2 nights in a row. They don't have central air, and there was an air conditioner 2 feet from my left ear for 2 nights in a row, and that's when it hit. The day after that, we played golf, and with my niece and nephew, and driving home, like, oh, what's going on here? And that's started the whole thing. So yeah, and some of my ENT friends have kind of poo-pooed that. They would say that there's no hard evidence that exposure to cold air causes Bell's palsy, but they did. I got one of them to at least admit maybe there is a zoster effect. In other words, the varicella zoster virus, which is what causes shingles and chickenpox. I had chickenpox as a kid, so I do have the virus within me. And it's possible that maybe the exposure to the air could have activated some dormant virus activity that affected that particular nerve. All I know is you can't just turn a switch and turn that nerve back on. It's going to take time. And luckily, I was pretty patient. And my wife has said that she really couldn't believe that I didn't fall to pieces when it first happened. But I guess my response is, well, what else was I going to do? I wasn't missing any work. I had no choice but to just deal with it, and I had a trombone, which helps because I would try to play trumpet before I really could, even though Bobby Shew was probably not recommending I go to the trumpet yet, but I'd try it. And Laura, my wife, would say, "Why do you do that? You're just frustrating yourself." So I was able to play trombone because it has a bigger mouthpiece and it can contain the leak.
Right.
Because what happens is, you try to blow, and this side of your lip doesn't have the strength to stay shut. And so blowing your lips open is only going to happen on the strong side. And but I could play trombone, and there was a point where I could play higher on trombone than I could on trumpet, which I thought was kind of funny and sad at the same time, because I'm not really a great trombone player, but I could play a high F. I have good high chops on trombone, and I could do that long before I could play anything even close to the top of the staff on trumpet. And just gradually over time, and as the gigs started to trickle in, I would get it more and more. The last thing to come is endurance in my case. I don't know if other guys have said that too. The one of the biggest gigs of my life, especially given the COVID thing, was a year and a half ago at the Rochester Jazz Festival. A really great trumpet player named Matt Owens was not able to make a gig with a band that was from New York City, and it was Bill Warfield's band, Hell's Kitchen Funk Orchestra, I believe it's called. And his music is not easy. And I came in there playing mostly second trumpet, maybe a little bit of the lead too, a couple solos. And I knew I could read the music because I played with bands of that caliber in the past, but I wasn't sure about the endurance part. And I somehow got through the gig, and it was one of the greatest nights of my life because I figured, all right, I'm on my way.
Sure.
Now. I'm not where I hope to be, and I'm not totally back, so to speak. But man, I got through this, and the guys in the band were very complimentary. I'm not sure how many of them knew that I was still recovering from this because I didn't want to announce it and set up an expectation. Oh, why did they get this guy? But I just did my thing, and it was a great night because it proved to myself, and I'm sure I let Bobby know about that because we're still in touch every so often, But we would do our lessons over Zoom, and because I didn't know about Riverside, so we used Zoom. That was called Riverside, and
yeah.
So and then the rehearsal started up again, the band started up again, and that's the kind of thing that will put you back on track. I'm in a Steely Dan cover or tribute band right now that I have a gig with tonight called Bad Sneakers, and I write all the horn charts for that. And I like that gig also just for the chop work because it's not really a lead book. It's one trumpet. There's not a lot of high notes. There's not loud playing, but there's a lot of playing. So it's a good gig for just musicality and sound. You know what I mean? And blending with two sax players and that kind of thing. And it's been a treat for I guess I would say the second half of the recovery. The first half was rough. First half, you really need to be patient. You cannot rush it. You can't do anything before you're ready, and you have to let the neuromuscular connections reestablish themselves. And Bobby talked about sometimes some of the things that you do, like holding things shut to get your muscles and the nerve that runs to the muscle, in this case the facial nerve, used to the idea that no, when you do this is going to be shut. Don't get used to the idea that it's going to just blow out every time. And those things really do work over time. And if you're patient and diligent, I remember, I don't know, it was about 4 months, I think, until I could actually play trumpet. So I know there are guys out there that had quicker recoveries than mine, some that had longer recoveries than mine. When I first got my Bell's palsy, one of the reasons that the neurologist didn't think it was that my face didn't really droop. I have a friend of mine who's another trumpet player and a band leader I used to play for before he moved away. His whole face just went, it was like it was melting off him. I felt terrible because I knew what it was like for me. And I thought, man, he's going to have a much rougher recovery than I did because it was just a much more severe case. There's no pain. It's just that, you're not numb. You can feel it. It's just that you have no control over it. And reading can be hard. Reading music can be hard because, you kind of lose control of your eyelid and blinking and things like that. And so, those things that I talked about as far as that, it was called a Grostic maneuver. And Bobby was like, see if you can find someone that does, and I'd never heard that word before. I was like, what in the world are you talking about? And sure enough, when I asked the chiropractor, Heinz, about that, he said, oh, actually, that's what we're doing right now. And it was kind of
Oh,
funny,
cool.
Yeah, yeah. And so I still practice every day. I do my flexibilities and my own practice routine, whatever it is that I have worked out that has helped me. But sometimes it's still good to go back to some of the things that Bobby talked about, like the fluttering, things that get the blood flowing, that get the nerve kind of warmed up again to do its thing, so that even when you feel good, I have learned that as I get older, when my chops are in good shape, when I've been playing a lot, I feel like I don't have to warm up. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of other guys can relate to that. I still think it's probably a good idea to just start slowly anyway. Don't just
Probably,
pick
yeah.
up the horn and start wailing away just because you feel good. It's probably not a good idea, especially if you have a rehearsal or a gig later on that day. Yeah, just do it, go slow, let things warm up naturally, more organically, the way they probably want to, and that might help stave off chops injuries. And I didn't really practice a lot back in the 90s when I was having my initial chop problems. So I was picking up the horn, playing my gig, doing my thing, and all I played in those days was lead and some jazz and some bands. I don't do any orchestral kind of playing. I'm not playing etudes. I didn't have to. So, and I was in an apartment where it was hard to practice without bothering people. So I'm thinking I'd probably, ask for some of those problems in the 90s by just not maintaining what I had, because
Sure.
when you're young, I've heard of a couple very well-known trumpet players that just never practiced that much. Just like there was one famous golfer, Bruce Litsky, that never practiced. But he was lucky enough that he could reproduce his golf swing every time exactly and hit the ball square, and he always knew where it was going. And he just didn't feel like working any harder on it. And he was always in the money. And every time he went into a tournament, even though he wasn't the top guy. And I just can't. The older I get, the less I can get away with that. I could do it when I was in my 20s, I think. But,
Right.
And
well, you bring up so many good points. And first of all, I just want to tell you that I'm so happy that you're able to play again, because, like you said, everybody's situation is different. And I've talked to people who have had Bell's palsy that have had longer recoveries, or even I think everyone I've talked to has been able to come back from it, thankfully. But it is a process, and it is something, especially those preliminary moments of recovery, of putting the horn down. It's just I think it's the most critical time of your recovery, in my opinion, because there's so many times when during that time it's almost like a reflex. Like you're so used to spending your time doing one thing, and then when that's taken away, you have to find something else to fill that time, but also to come, to mentally, recover from that, with that time of like being, with that patience, with that resiliency that you need to start to develop, which oftentimes as trumpet players or musicians in general, we don't necessarily have that resilience until it kind of gets thrown upon us. And a couple of other things that I wanted to just point out, and some things I'm curious about as well, with your situation. During that time, I'm also curious about that time in the 90s that you mentioned of having child problems, but also your experience with Bell's palsy. The thing I think I'm most passionate about, because of what I just said, is helping musicians see what they can do from a musical standpoint when they're injured, and also, to stay musically fulfilled. But then also, the ways that they can kind of grow as a person when they don't have that primary form of expression, that we like to think about. And so during those times of injury and coming back from Bell's palsy, like, what did you do along with like playing the trombone that helped you to stay fulfilled musically, but then also just kind of staying ahead of the curve, right, of that recovery mental game?
Because remember, music is not just blowing the horn. I mean, there are other things. There's this, right? I could sit down at the piano. I've written some music. I wrote all the horn charts for the Steely Dan band that I'm in. So that was a nice little challenge, because I wasn't used to writing charts. I'm not an arranger per se, by getting used to the transpositions and everything, having to condense sometimes a very lush horn part, which might have 8 different horns, to 3 guys. What are the most important notes? So that kept me occupied with thinking of things that are very musical without having to focus on, oh God, my chops. You know what I mean?
Right.
There were bands that actually kept me going in the 90s when I was actually otherwise had, considered just was like stopping playing, just not playing anymore. There was a big band that a friend of mine, Justin Flynn, put together. He was an Eastman grad student at the time, and it was sort of a New York, like a Thad and Mellon New York style band. We used to play it on Monday nights, I think, at a bar, restaurant place right near the Eastman School, and I played lead in that. And because of the fact that I was only playing lead and a couple solos, I could play hard and not let it show how crappy my trumpet playing was. I could still pound it out. And the caliber of musicians in that band, like Charles Ruggiero was on drums. It was just Dave Gibson was on lead trombone. It was pretty spectacular array of talent in that band, and that really, I think I might have told Justin at some point that probably kept me from quitting trumpet altogether, because it kept me going. So I was able to get away with it in that particular band, even though I was struggling every time I went to try to practice, and it sounded like crap, because I wasn't practicing the way I played in that band. So finding an outlet for your ability and your talent that allows you to focus on the music and not your chops. Because I know my philosophy of playing lead has always been, I want to play it as if I wrote it. I don't want anyone to think I'm reading it. It's just this is what I just came up with now, and I've always been a more musical player than maybe an accurate player. You know what I mean? I was even in high school, I could play it and I could phrase the way the pros did, even though I couldn't play the horn as well. I know there are a couple very prominent lead trumpet players in history that were known for missing a lot of notes, but they sounded so good when they played because of their sound and their phrasing that everyone just loved them. That they would put up with a few cracked notes or missed notes or a few clams here and there because of the way they played. And I've always hoped that the people around me felt the same way. If I wasn't going to be as accurate as the Eastman grad student sitting next to me, at least they'll hopefully like the way I phrase and the way I make the music hopefully come to life, which is what I'm trying to do, trying to do justice to the music. And when you're doing that, you're thinking about the music. You're not thinking about this, because when you think about this, it's paralysis by analysis. You're not gonna play well, or I'm not anyway. And I remember hearing an interview with my favorite musician, Pat Metheny, the guitar player. He said that when he's playing his best, he's actually listening to himself play. It's almost like he's not like creating the music; he's reacting to what he just did, which is a hard thing to explain. But when he said it, I got it, and this goes back to high school with me. Is that when I was playing really well, even in concert band, I was kind of listening to how it sounded with the band. I wasn't making it in the moment, if that makes any sense. And I was kind of enjoying it.
I think so, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. I was just kind of letting it happen instead of making it happen. Maybe that's another way to put it, to let it happen. And if you're playing in a band with good music, that's much easier to do. With good musicians, it's much easier to do. If you're playing, if you take a gig only because of the money, and maybe it's you're not digging it, that's when I never felt fulfilled. You know what I mean? And that's when I start worrying about my chops, because it's like there was nothing else to worry about. This, I'm not having a good time with this music or these guys, whatever it is. You know what I mean? And luckily, I've gotten to a point where I don't have to play in crappy bands anymore. Every band I play in has good people and good musicians and good friends at the same time playing good music. So very fortunate there too. Right. And I live in a perfect town to be who and what I am, because if I were in a big city, a New York City, I probably couldn't compete with the full-time guys. If I were in a town like where I grew up, which isn't far from where you grew up, in sort of semi-rural Pennsylvania, I don't think I would have a lot of gigs to play, at least not without getting in the car and traveling a lot. But Rochester is a medium city, medium at best, and there's a lot of good musicians here. every kind of music is represented here, and a lot of good bands. And hopefully, I have enough of a reputation. I get called for a lot of the good stuff, and I love it. And I have a lot of friends that play. Although in this town, there's a lot of guys like me that do something else for a living. There aren't a lot of full-time musicians in this town, except maybe ones that are also teachers by day.
Right.
And some
Well,
of
and
the
that's actually where I wanted to go
play,
next.
Actually.
Yeah. Seriously. That's where I wanted to go next, because I was just curious as I was preparing for this interview. I don't have a lot of experience with talking to audiologists, and especially not audiologists who have gone through Bell's palsy. And so I was curious, when you were going through this Bell's palsy, if your professional training, how did that influence your, like, kind of how you framed your situation with Bell's palsy, but also, like, if, I don't know how I'm trying to phrase this, but just how your professional work did, how you viewed your experience with Bell's palsy while you were in it. Like, did that kind of give you a little bit more of a kind of an edge that you think that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise if you weren't an audiologist, or
Well,
what? I'm just curious.
yeah. I mean, I'm lucky enough to work in a profession by day where I get to help people. It's a helping profession, right? It's in the medical field, and with what I work with a lot of vertigo patients, positional vertigo. There's an awful lot of satisfaction there. I mean, I had a really stressful situation the last couple of days, which luckily will happen no more. That person has been, I think he's done with us, and that can be very stressful. But that's not the norm. Mostly, I leave that office every day thinking, I helped out some people here, and I used whatever kind of a brain I've got to help them improve their lives in any way. Things like tinnitus, vertigo, hearing loss, whatever. And it also keeps, I didn't have to dwell on, I got this Bell's palsy, I can't, so if I were sitting at home and all I did were play trumpet and I couldn't do that anymore, I would think that would be really, really devastating. You know what I mean? And I don't want to be negative towards anyone that is in that situation, that is a full-time player, but I am very, very fortunate in that regard. That it also, because of my training, I know a bit about the cranial. I had to learn the cranial nerves, you know what I mean? And so
Right.
I know a lot more about the physiology of the face and the musculature and even breathing, because I was actually in the speech pathology program at grad school at Syracuse before I switched to audiology. So you learn all about the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm and breathing and the oral cavity, resonance, those kind of things. I didn't really think about it at the time, but it definitely gave me an edge to try to think about what you do to play an instrument and to do it efficiently. Because that's what I'm about right now, is that I'm trying to get the most output with the least amount of input, instead of busting my face and busting my gut every time I go to try to play. Because if you want to do that, that's fine. But boy, there's a lot easier ways to do it. It's a happier place to be, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I played with Walter White, great lead trumpet player, once about 25 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Woody Herman Ghost Band hit. All the musicians were from usually New York City, and a couple might have come up from Miami, maybe. And it was up in New York State. I was like the token local guy, and I played second trumpet because they wanted someone who was like a lead player to support the lead. And Walter's a big guy, and he was playing this Bobby Shew Z horn trumpet and a little tiny Bobby Shew mouthpiece. And I said, how do you get all that sound out of that tiny little equipment? And he just kind of laughed, and I sent him an email, and he was talking about just efficiency. And he just said, believe me, it's a happier place to be if you can get to that point where you can do that. Because I was still stuck in that shop problem thing where I was playing a huge mouthpiece and working my behind off just to try to keep up with him, and there he was, a lot happier than I was, and so that's kind of my continuing quest, you know what I mean? And I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to find like the best horn or mouthpiece for you. I don't think you should make it the Holy Grail quest, because you'll be doomed to frustration the rest of your life. But at least there are definitely things that help you better. My philosophy has always been that the right instrument and the right mouthpiece will not make you better, but the wrong instrument and the wrong mouthpiece will hold you back. You know what I'm saying? If you're playing well on your equipment, it's because you're playing well. But if you're not, and it happens to do the mouthpiece, then then you need to re-examine that and go to ITG or whatever, wherever they set up the all the booths. I haven't been to one of those in forever, but those can be a lot of fun. But also, you can really check out what's out there and see, wow, this is why my friend so and so played this. And it can be fun,
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the guys that they insist they want to play the same horn and mouthpiece their whole career, and that's fine too. Whatever floats your boat.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going back to the educator thing. It's important that, educators are in the know about the equipment, but also they have that mentality of, at least from my perspective, right? I'm not a teacher,
Yeah.
so, or at least right now. But it's just important to be in the know about the specifics of instruments, trumpet or otherwise,
Yeah.
but from a physiology standpoint. And I also, I hear you on the efficiency thing, because when I first got injured, and found out why I did, it was equipment, but mostly a technique thing. And then when I found out that, you can actually play the trumpet, efficiently, and it's just easier physically to do so, it was like my whole world opened up to me. Right. And that's actually a big reason why I stayed in the game. Right. And yeah, thanks so much for going into that, that aspect of your career with the audiology, because I was curious when I was preparing, how you viewed your time with Bell's palsy, having a day job versus, musicians who are full-time musicians. And, do you feel like that kind of helped you? Well, I guess you already talked about it, but more specifically, do you feel like that helped you, in the, coming back? Like if this comes back, great. If not, I still got this. Or was it like, no, I still want to come back because of, for whatever
I wanted to come
reason.
back. No, if anything had ever happened that prevented me from playing again at any kind of a decent level, I would have been devastated. I was absolutely devastated, because playing the horn and playing music is still my original love. You know what I mean? I love my professional career in audiology, obviously, and I love what I do, and I love the satisfaction it brings me. But at the same time, there's very little in life that can compare to standing up there on stage with a band and making a joyful noise with all these other people.
Totally.
And making people happy, and hopefully more people are in the crowd than there are in the band, and even if they're not, sometimes it's even more fulfilling, because
right.
you did something for the music, not for the crowd. And when you play something for yourself and for the music, the crowd that's there will pick that up. You know what I mean? Whereas if you play to the crowd, you're kind of setting up for just, people might even pick up that it might be a little bit disingenuous, So, but no, it's been, I have very little complaints at this time. I'm definitely a better trumpet player than I was before Bell's palsy. If I'm not quite as strong, you know what I mean? And it's getting there. It's getting there. But everything is easier than it was before, and that's largely thanks to Bobby and some of his philosophies about playing, aperture control, and things like that, which I'm not going to get into because that's really his thing, and I don't want any credit for that or whatever, and I'm not here to lecture people on how you should or shouldn't play the horn, but I had, you talked about equipment. There's a high school age son of a friend of ours who had to get certain brand of trumpet and a certain mouthpiece because his teacher said so. And I just, oh God, really, and it's because it's almost dogmatic that this particular combination is what you're supposed to have at that age. And it's like, really, I think Bobby would have something to say about that, and I'm totally
yes, he would.
in agreement on that. And we don't want to get into the specifics of the brand. We don't. That's not necessary.
Right.
It's just that it's just a lot of that stuff is no more than a tradition. You know what I mean? Got to have that silver horn that looks a certain way, and to show that you've gotten a certain place. Whereas, I probably would have played my original Olds Ambassador student model better than some of these other horns because maybe that horn suited me better. You know what I mean? And just, so what if it wasn't shiny and silver, And those were good horns, actually.
That's my horn. It's an old student model.
Yeah. I have,
and I think it's important too. Oh, nice. Yeah, I think it's important to also just recognize.
I'm probably not going to keep all of them, but yeah, I'm sorry. It's important to realize.
Oh, yeah. No, it's, these educators, they're all coming from a good place, right? And from a desire to see their students succeed,
Of course.
and put what they believe is going to set them up for success. But then at the same time, there's been a lot of development, right, in the equipment and the knowledge we have in equipment, in the equipment field, and also how equipment relates to physiology, and every student's different. Just to look for different differences in their students that would change what equipment they would use. But yeah, we're all just trying to help people succeed, and that dogma is definitely not the thing that's going to help, right?
Right. And I love when Bobby says, you could conceivably hammer in a nail with a wrench if you had nothing else to do it with.
Right.
Boy, sure is easier if you get a hammer. You know what I mean? Because that's what it's actually made for.
Exactly.
And you have to figure out. And a young kid doesn't need to figure out what kind of playing he wants to do when he's in sixth grade. But I'm saying as you
Right.
develop, and you wonder, and you hear other guys, and you might develop a sound concept based on who you hear and what turns you on. When I was in eighth grade, I think I saw Buddy Rich's, or maybe ninth grade, I saw Buddy Rich's band, and he had this Finnish lead trumpet player named Simo Salminen. It took me years, decades to figure out who it was. And I just sat there like this, listening to him all night. And I just couldn't believe it. And I just said, that is what I wanted to sound like. And when I went home at 10 o'clock, it was at Reading High School. You know where Reading is, right?
Oh, no way. That's 30 minutes away from where I grew up.
Yep. And that sound got inside my ears and my head, and holy moly. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But, it was the kind of thing where I always wished he knew that there was at least one kid out there that was inspired by him. And I've always hoped that at some point I would play something and someone of the same age might listen to me and have the same experience and say, hey, I like how that sounds. I would really love to be able to do that. So to kind of pay that favor forward, and
Beautiful.
Open up some ears and turn
Ron,
someone on the
just thank
same
you
way.
so much for, thank you so much for your time today. I really loved our conversation on it and off camera, and I feel like just the more people that share their stories about injury, trumpet or otherwise, it's going to help so many people. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for that, for your time.
I hope so. Yeah. I think the bottom line is there is hope, and you will get better, but be patient and do it the right way, and get with a teacher that has experience with this kind of thing.
Totally. I got one, and the last two questions, it's kind of funny you said that, because the last question I like to ask is if there's any musician who's going through injury, regardless if it's a trumpet player or anybody, but they tap you on the shoulder and they say, hey, I heard you on this podcast talking about your injury, and I'm going through an injury myself. What advice would you give? And I'm sure you just, that would be what you would say to them.
Right. I would say don't rush it. Have patience. Stick with it. Don't do too much too fast. Don't cause another injury. And that's very important. Right. But and get with the right teacher, someone who has experience. In my case, it was Bobby Shew, and I can't recommend him any stronger than I already do. But there might be others that are appropriate too and closer to the person. And that's the best advice I can give. And just keep up your love for your instrument and the music, and stay true to the music.
Totally. And then my last question for you, and you kind of addressed this already, but just kind of want to take you back to that day in 2020, and you have the opportunity to go back in time and, do whatever you needed to do to prevent that Bell's palsy from happening. Has it been worth it enough to you since then to leave that situation there, or would you change it? Would you warn yourself about that air conditioning unit?
You know what? It might sound weird to say, and I'm not a perpetual. I don't typically look through rose-colored glasses. However, in this case, I don't think I'd have it any other way. I hate to say it, but I'm almost glad it happened, because it made me a better player. I had to just sacrifice some time, but it was during COVID, so I didn't miss any gigs. So, and again, I'm extremely fortunate of the timing. But no, I mean, if that's what it took to get me to play better and easier and more efficiently, then so be it. So be it. I'm good with it. I don't want to have any regrets as far as that goes.
Beautiful. I know, and that's the response I get from, I think, everybody that I've asked that question to. But I think the more people hear it, the more people hear it, they'll get more resilience and more patience and hope, to keep pushing through their injury. And that's just my hope with this show. So I thank you so much for your time, Ron.
I think you're doing a great thing, and I think you should keep it up, and I hope to see more. Probably won't watch this one. I don't want to see myself, but I'm looking forward to the others.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. And to the rest of you out there in podcast land, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Trust the Process. And until next time, keep doing that. Keep trusting the process. Thanks for listening today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. To see a full bio for our guest today, see the show notes, or go to our website at trusttheprocesspodcast.com. Make sure you share this with a musician you care about who is going through injury, a music educator in your life, or anyone just trying to make it in life. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. Before we go, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you and shout out to my team: Daniel Baldwin, who is my audio engineer, Kevin West, who does all music and sound effects for the show, Peyton Womack, our website developer, and my sister, Dana Lovell, who created the logo and promotional materials. We wouldn't have this show without them. So tune in next time for another episode of Trust the Process.